Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking all about stubborn fat loss and stubborn fat loss tactics. So I felt like this is something that really should be discussed because there are definitely times where there is a time and a place for stubborn fat loss tactics. And there also is a time and a place where stubborn fat loss tactics will actually backfire and make things worse. So I want to kind of decipher the difference and talk a little bit today about what I mean by stubborn fat loss tactics, when they are useful, and when you should stay away because they are just fad diets in disguise. So when we're talking about stubborn fat loss tactics, it's important to understand that stubborn fat loss based on industry standards, it's kind of one of those hidden things that nobody really discusses. So like when we're looking at like the science of stubborn fat loss, stubborn fat is like vanity weight. So that's the first thing that I would say coming out of the gate that most people don't understand, because most of us tend to look at, if you're having an issue with fat loss, you're thinking like, isn't all fat stubborn? Like my fat's stubborn. So there are a lot of times where there is someone who is, 30, 50, 75, 150, 200 pounds overweight, and they feel like their fat is stubborn. Now, is their weight loss journey probably hard or difficult? Yes. Does it feel like, is it possible to be 100 pounds overweight, 50 pounds overweight, 20 pounds overweight and feel like, oh my gosh, no matter what I do, this weight won't come off? Yes. So like what we feel about our weight stubbornness and what is actually classified as stubborn fat loss are typically two different things. That's the reason why I like to kind of shed light on the topic of stubborn fat loss, because from a marketing standpoint, from the standpoint of the fitness industry or supplement industry or diet industry, it's very easy to tempt people to buy whatever it is that you have to offer by being able to say that something is for stubborn fat loss. So if you feel personally, emotionally, like your fat is stubborn, you are going to be emotionally drawn to purchase that item. However, from the science standpoint, from the standpoint of research, from the standpoint of the fitness industry, when we're actually talking about stubborn fat loss, like I said, that is vanity weight. That is like the last 5 to 15 pounds. That is the like stage weight for a bodybuilder in competition, for a figure competitor, for a fitness model, for someone like a celebrity who has a role where they have to like hit a certain weight. So stubborn fat loss, and like when we're looking at it from that standpoint, is like you have a 4-pack and you want 6. So it's really at that like finish line stage of your fat loss journey, not the beginning stages. It's very important to understand the difference, because not only is like terms often thrown around in ways that are not beneficial, because sometimes things are just kind of said interchangeably. So sometimes it's on purpose and sometimes the person who's promoting it doesn't really know. But from, like I say, the science standpoint, typically it's marginal gains territory. It's where like you have already put in all the hard work that you can possibly manage. You're past your body's like set point or at your body's set point. And these are the things that push it past that set point, that push you over the edge, that push your body to like new levels, to like a level that it either hasn't been before or hasn't been in a very long time. So therefore, like you have to make these different maneuvers in order to get past that point. So first, understanding what stubborn fat is helps you to then understand why this is something that needs to be discussed, because of the fact that so many people are starting out their journey using stubborn fat loss tactics that are meant to be temporary finish line tactics. So if something is meant to help you to lose the last 5 to 15 pounds, but you're doing it at the beginning of your journey, often these are referred to, you'll hear them as like called like kickstart or jumpstart your journey or something like that. So a lot of times there's different clever marketing tactics that are used in order to convince the person to start it. And like I said, if you don't even like recognize it, it's the first of all, like if you hear it's a stubborn fat loss tactic, you're gonna be like, yes, please, I want it. But second of all, even if you know what stubborn fat loss tactics are, if they're not saying that specifically and it doesn't seem like a fad to you at first glance, because I know a lot of people who follow this channel, like you're very savvy, you understand, and you're trying to step away from fad diets. But it's important to understand like how we get caught up in those circles. So if something is intended to be a stubborn fat loss tactic and it's promoted to someone who has 100, 75, 50, 20, like I said, like you have more than 15 pounds to lose and you're using these marginal gains tactics, what happens is that you do get off that 5, 10, 15 pounds rather quickly. And because of that, you become so super committed to that tactic, although it has now served its purpose. It's done what it was meant to do. And that is get you that quick, push you past that finish line mark, but it was only capable of, really performing a small amount of, loss in the grand scheme. So it's meant to happen after you've done all the work and you've ran out of all the options so that it can push you to the finish line. If you're using finish line tactics in the beginning of your journey, it can be extremely frustrating. You start off strong and you feel like you're doing something that finally works. But because you have more than 15 pounds to lose, when things start to dwindle at that 15-pound mark, sometimes you may even get 20 to 25 pounds if you have a lot of weight to lose. But then it begins to stall out. You can begin to feel like something is wrong with you. So that's the reason why I say it's important to understand what stubborn fat loss actually is versus what we feel like it is, because of the fact that a lot of the reason why so many of us feel like our fat is stubborn is because we are executing stubborn fat loss tactics every single time we go to lose weight. So if every single time you're using a tactic that only gets you 10% of the way and then everything fizzles out, you're wondering like, why is it so hard? Why are things so hard for me? And that's because you haven't put in that 90% of doing the like day-to-day, boring, repetitive, habit building pieces of the puzzle that get you to the finish line. You're using the cross over the finish line tactics much too early in your journey. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more insight, because I always like to start off with that mindset piece to the puzzle, because understanding the psychology behind what's happening is so much more important than just having information. Having information and actually embodying that information and acting on that information are two totally different things. And usually that's why, because if I just came on here and said, hey, here's the top 5 stubborn fat loss tactics, like you're just going to keep being stuck in that same stubborn fat loss tactic loop. So now that you know that stubborn fat is meant for marginal gains, is meant for to get you across the finish line, it's meant for that last 5 to 15 pounds, it's meant for getting you from the 4-pack to the 6-pack. Like now that you get that, then we can start looking at, okay, when are those things actually useful? And like I said, if you understand that it's a finish line tactic, now you get a better idea of when it's useful, typically at the end of your journey. So this is going to be when you have like exhausted all of their efforts, you already, you've gotten your calories or whatever the amount of calories that you're supposed to be eating for the duration of that phase, you've got it locked down, done. Like I've zeroed in on it. I can freaking hit my calories in my sleep. Same thing with macros. Like you're getting in the amount of like protein and water, fiber, things like that, the macros and the micros, you're able to nail those things without even thinking. So if you're doing those things, you are eating the way that you're supposed to be eating, you're hitting the macros that you're supposed to be hitting, you're being consistent with your workouts, you're like 80 to 100% consistent with your workouts, you're doing like periodized workout plans where you're switching things up every 4 to 6 weeks and progressively overloading, you're stacking on, increasing your weight, changing up rest periods and the amount of intensity and volume and the frequency of your workouts. You're doing all of those things and you have gotten at least 80 to 90% of your goal accomplished. That is when stubborn fat loss tactics are game changers, because if you're at 90% of your goal, especially if you're, you know, someone who is like a goal setter. Like I'm all about goals, and typically my goals are going to be like a little pie in the sky. They're going to be a little beyond like what I'm actually capable of. So if that's the case, and like I said, you're there to where maybe everyone else around you is like, what? You look amazing. You don't need to change anything out. Like, what is even wrong with you? But you know that now you're like, I want to push my body to a place that it's never been before. I want to accomplish this, whatever vision in my head that like I may even doubt is possible. And I am like doing these things. It's been, you know, whatever, 8 weeks or so of me doing this, 4 to 8 weeks, and nothing has changed. I was tweaking and doing all the things along the way, and now I've really hit this bump in the road. Like it's a true plateau, and it's like the end of the road plateau, the plateau that like, honestly, if I stopped here, I'd probably be good. If I stopped here, I wouldn't complain, but I just want to see if I can do it. That is when you execute a stubborn fat loss tactic. Or like I said, if you have like, so, you know, a magazine photo shoot or whatever, just your own, a photo shoot for your own purposes that you're doing where you want to be like maxed out potential, or you're hitting the stage, or like I said, if you are a fitness model or something like that is when those things are like chef's kiss. But now that you understand that, that means that you still want to put in the work ahead of time. So what are the stubborn fat loss tactics, right? Like I've dragged you along long enough, right? We've talked about like what they are, like what stubborn fat loss is. We talked about when it's useful, but now let's get into the nitty-gritty of what stubborn fat loss tactics actually are, so that you can recognize them when you see them, and then you can categorize them so that if it's something that you're like, oh, I definitely want to try that, or something comes up and it's super tempting for you, you can kind of take it along the checklist of, is this a stubborn fat loss tactic, or is this a, you know, 80 to 90% tactic? You can categorize them accordingly. And then you can have the stockpile of things that you want to try, or that you know that you can aim for once you get into your 10% like finish line area. So a couple of ways that you can recognize stubborn fat loss tactics. So I'm going to give you like the description of what they are, and then obviously like name some, but I don't want to just name them, because I don't want it to be like a be all end all list of just like, it's this, is this, is this, is this, those are stubborn fat loss, because something else new could come up tomorrow, because I don't keep up with fads, because I don't do them, but it could come up. And then if it's not in this list, then you're going to be like, I don't know, that wasn't stubborn fat loss, I'm going to try it. Okay. So the biggest way that I would say to be able to recognize if a stubborn fat loss tactic is a marginal gains tactic, if it's something that should be moved into the 10% category and not part of the 90, is if it ignores the basics. Right there, that is going to be a huge red flag. So if you haven't already, I did do a video before about 3 red flags about your diet. Like those, anything that falls in those categories would absolutely fall into, probably into stubborn fat loss tactic territory. But the way that I would sum most of them up is if they avoid the basics. So just as I talked about earlier, like if you know that like 80% of your time, 80% of your fat loss journey should be spent on nailing the basics of fat loss. That is making sure you are eating enough food for your goal, whatever that is. So if your goal is to gain muscle, you're in a surplus. If your goal is to maintain, you're eating at maintenance level calories. And if your goal is to lose fat, you are eating in a deficit. So if you are eating in a proper deficit, doesn't have to be extreme. So you want to make sure that you're eating at the deficit that is sufficient for your maintenance levels, which typically is only maybe like 15% max, you know, below. So you don't have to drastically slash your calories. So if it's ignoring that, of being aware of what you're eating, of looking at the food, making sure that you're hitting the right amount of protein, making sure that you're getting in enough fiber, making sure that you're drinking enough water, making sure that you're exercising regularly for like basic amounts of time. If it's skipping past those into something else, so let's say you're not looking at the calories of your food, but you're cutting out an entire food group, or you're cutting out a macronutrient, or you are only eating like certain types of food. So like that's one of the things. So I know I did a video recently on tracking your food and how it can be beneficial, and how I really think that it's a huge game changer for maintaining your weight loss. And that's one of the things that I see a lot of, is when people don't track their food, they can't maintain the weight loss. So that would be why, because typically diets that don't have you actually have an awareness around your food that you're putting into your mouth daily, like there's no way for you to like really build a habit around that unless you are 100% going to eat the same things for the rest of your life. So like that's kind of it, which sometimes, you know, that's possible. There are people who don't mind eating the same things over and over and over. So that's why, like I said in the beginning of that one, it's totally possible to lose weight without tracking your food. But if you don't understand the basics of food, like if you're bypassing understanding how much food to eat, how much, what maintenance looks like for your body, what eating enough protein looks like for your body, what eating enough fiber looks like for your body, how much water you could, like what you can increase your water levels to, developing a consistent workout routine. Like when things aren't having you like track those things, even though they might be easier in the beginning to lose the weight, or like I said, it allows you to be more carefree, because I get it, we all have different personality types. So a lot of personality types are just like, I don't care, I'm not logging my food, I don't care. If it's having you log that, like that could be a red flag, because of the fact that it is bypassing. It's bypassing you understanding how to feed your body. That is something that you cannot bypass if you want to lose fat and keep it off. If you want to just lose weight, then yes, you can absolutely bypass it. You can skip learning how to eat properly. You can skip learning how different food combinations affect your body. You can skip knowing what protein, carbs, or fat even are. You can totally skip all those things. But in bypassing them, you are probably using a quick fix, because of the fact that you're bypassing. So that any quick fix is going to be in stubborn fat loss tactics. Like that's going to be something that, like, because it is so typically like drastic or extreme, then it still gets the weight off, but like you don't know how. You don't know what it did to get the weight off. So that's what I would say, like to like lump it together when we're trying to figure out like what it would do or what it looks like to be in that quick fix territory, is bypassing the basics. If it is like, say something is just like reduce all your carbs, often that means it's trying to fix your protein ratios. You would do better at learning how to fix your protein ratios, understanding how to eat more protein, understanding what 25 to 30 grams of protein looks like at each meal, understanding different ways that like, is it a shake? How does it look like food wise? What does it look like, you know, if I'm on vacation? What does it look like when I'm not on vacation? Understanding all of these various scenarios for how this calorie macronutrient combo required for your goals comes together is the basics. Anything that bypasses that can help you to lose weight. I will not lie and say that it does not. So I don't want any haters coming like, she said you have to log your food, or like, I'm not saying you have to. We are all adults here. And I always want to empower people to make the choices that best suit them, that best suits their personality, that helps them to accomplish their goals. But if your goal is permanent fat loss, then skipping those things is not going to be beneficial to you. So that is where I would kind of lump them together, is if any tactic that avoids the basics is a quick fix. It is marginal gains at best. It is likely not very sustainable unless you have a very, like I say, very OCD personality, to where like, okay, this is how I'm going to eat forever, ever, and ever. And even then, typically, if you have a very OCD personality, you're probably not upset about logging your food. So the person that says like, I'm OCD, but I'm not going to log my food, I don't buy it. You're not OCD, because they don't have a problem logging their food. Typically it's a person who wants a little bit more like freedom and less structure in what they're doing, that doesn't want to log their food. Or like I mentioned in that video, like they have so much freedom and structure in all these other areas of life. They're just like, I can't, it just gives me way too much anxiety to do this as well. So making sure that you're eating enough protein, food, fiber, all that good stuff is usually that's an 80% category, something that, or 90% category. Anything that moves you out of that moves back into marginal gains territory. The other thing that I would say is, and it kind of goes along with the first one, is anything that doesn't require you to be consistent. So if it's something that you can do for a very short amount of time, which usually that's a big red flag, and I think most of us kind of recognize that, but also deep down, most of us still want it. And so we know that like the 21-day thing or the 30-day thing or the 4-day thing or whatever, the 12-week thing, like we know that like theoretically, like that's not a lifetime event. So like, I'm just doing this for a short amount of time and then I'm going to receive this result. If it doesn't require you to do that thing forever, then it's probably marginal gains territory. So that's the reason why, like, even though there are things that may teeter the border of this. So when you have certain types of eating styles, like paleo or something like that, like typically, you know, they are saying to like for it to become a lifestyle for you. So like in that case, like you'll typically discover that that is part of it, is that, okay, like if you're starting to eat this way, then it needs to become a lifestyle. The thing that I would say though is beware of fad diets parading around as lifestyle diets. So another instance of that, like I say, would be something in between. So often a person that is like hardcore vegan is doing it for different reasons. Like they're doing it because they have like actual beliefs, or whether it's religious beliefs, whether it's beliefs about the planet, whether it's like sustainability, like their beliefs about becoming vegan outweigh anything else. So therefore, it is a lifestyle for them. However, there are people who look at that person's belief system, like something that came from their belief system, or maybe something that came from a diagnosis, like with like keto or something like that. Maybe someone is diabetic and their doctor recommends that they go keto, they lose a lot of weight, and everybody else is like, oh, I should be keto. Or the actual original reason why a lot of those things were created, like keto for epilepsy, like people don't have epilepsy, but yet they're still executing on keto diets. So it's that same thing of like looking at someone else's like diagnosis or something that happened as a result of actions that they were doing, and then using that as a diet. Typically, that is marginal gains territory, because of the fact that if you don't have the belief system or the diagnosis that goes along with that, the odds of you continuing that is not very likely, which means you're only doing it for a short period of time, which means it's not requiring you to be consistent. So those are the two big picture red flags that I would say when you're trying to figure out if something is marginal gains territory or not. Is it short-lived? Basically, like it doesn't require you to be consistent. You can just execute on this thing for a short amount of time and this is going to happen. So like it's not an actual lifestyle thing, but also is it causing you to bypass the basics? So with that being said, some examples are which I just gave, which is keto. And I know that I give keto a hard time. And I know that there are people who use it for medical reasons or what have you. I also know, like I said, that some of the medical reasons that it was originally intended for, people are not using. And as someone who was diagnosed with epilepsy as a young child, like that is something that I look at as like, I mean, like I don't want to eat keto if I don't have to, which I don't. So like that is something to recognize, is that there are things that were created for one reason and then it takes on a whole new life of its own. So keto is one of those. Granted, there are people who choose to execute keto as a lifestyle. They do it, you know, fairly consistently, but there are a far higher number of people who execute on keto inconsistently and as a bypass to learning how to actually eat. So it's just like, because of the fact that it simplifies it, like, okay, high fat, low carb, like that's all that I'm paying attention to, which means that often many of them aren't actually even in ketosis because they aren't lowering their protein the way they're supposed to as well when they're on keto. So maybe they're eating a high amount of protein, which then means that that's not keto, that's just low carb. Or, you know, they are, because of the higher fat, they're actually fuller because fat is more satiating. So they're actually full. So they're eating less because they're having a higher fat intake. So it allows the weight loss to happen while bypassing actually learning what's in the food. Now, there are absolutely people who are keto and they log it because of the fact that they want to make sure that they're under the amount of carbs that they're eating. So, like I said, like if it's something that is 100% a lifestyle for that person, they're going to do it forever and ever and ever. They're able to be super consistent with it. You're using it to still make sure that you're eating whatever you're supposed to be eating. Like it can teeter the line, but like I say, if it's not giving you enough calories or giving you enough protein or giving you enough fiber, then it is still bypassing. So even if you have, you're doing keto, you're logging the food, you're committed to doing it for life, but you're not eating the amount of protein, fiber, calories that you should be eating for your stats, then that is something that it could be bypassing. So that's the important part, is that the bypassing doesn't mean don't do the thing. It just means learn what you're supposed to learn first. Be consistent in these things that you're supposed to be consistent in first. Then you can move into that phase. Because remember, like I said, I'm not saying don't ever do the stubborn fat loss tactics. I'm saying make sure you're doing them for the right reasons. Because if you are someone who is not 100% committed to being keto or being carnivore or whatever it is, then you're only planning on doing it for a very short period of time, which then puts it back into fad diet categories. Once it's in the fad diet category, you're punching a time clock, and if time runs out, willpower runs out before the result level gets reached, then you end up back in that cycle of feeling like something is wrong with you. Whereas you could have just been learning how to eat healthier. So like, just make sure that it's not something that you're bypassing because you think it'll help you to lose a quick 50 pounds. Because what happens after the 50 pounds is lost? What happens after the 20 pounds is lost? What happens after the 100 pounds is lost? As much as you want to lose the weight, it's very important to think long-term. Think with the end in mind. What happens after this is all said and done? Do you want to keep the weight off or not? And that's up to you. You may say no. You may say, I literally only want to do it for my wedding. Then I really don't care how much I weigh after that because I plan on having a baby and all this other stuff. Like, I don't care. Like, I really want to be this size by my anniversary. I really want to hit this size for my photo shoot. I have to hit the stage. It's time for me to drop the hammer, whatever. And then you can move into that territory. But just know and be prepared mentally if it doesn't get you to the finish line because you started off too far away from it. So like I said, those are just some examples. So pretty much anything in those categories where you are maybe drastically slashing calories, because that puts you into the temporary time. That's not something that you can do consistently. So if you're drastic, like HCG or something like that, that will put you into that stubborn fat loss category. It's only going to get you so far, and then it's going to ricochet you back afterwards. Something like keto or super low carb or super low fat, same thing. Like, those things are often like harder to keep up, even though they may have you looking at the food and tracking the food. If it's something that you can only keep up short term and not be consistent with, then that puts it back into stubborn fat loss. Even if you're like, but when I do it, it works. Great. Awesome. Use it when you're like down to the final 8 pounds and like you cannot get the scale to move. Go ahead, jump on that bandwagon, ride it out, and whatever, lose 10 pounds instead of 8 and like celebrate. But if you have more than that to lose, then you may want to think twice about it. Intermittent fasting, same thing, because of the fact that a lot of people intermittent fast and they don't actually pay attention to what they eat. So if you're fasting for 16 hours and only eating for 8, you may have such a short window, or maybe you're only eating for like 4 hours and fasting for 20 or something like that. The window is so short that you're not overeating, or that the amount of calories that you end up eating is less than what you would have eaten all day long. Like, that is something that does like feel easier because of the fact that like, hey, this was kind of effortless. Like, yes, I had to like grin and bear it for that 20 hours, but I'm able to like pig out for 4 hours, and it's awesome because I'm still losing weight and I eat whatever I want. Like, that's great. And maybe it's something that you feel like you can do consistently long term, but it's bypassing the basics. Because if something were to happen and you had to go back to eating normal, let's say whatever, let's say you got pregnant, or let's say, you know, there was a blood sugar issue and your doctor said, hey, you know, I'm gonna need you to start eating at more regular intervals until we can figure out what's wrong, or whatever the case may be, or just something happens, or like I said, it wasn't something that you planned on doing forever, so you do it, you get the weight off, and you go back to eating normal again. If the amount of calories that you eat expands in that normal eating window now, you don't really understand what happened, and you think that intermittent fasting was the key, when in actuality it was not, because it didn't teach you how to eat. It just told you when to eat, and it made it easier for you to cut calories. But because you don't really know where that was, you don't know where your calories were before, you don't know where they were when you're fasting, you can't recreate that scenario again, which again goes back to the previous video that I did on tracking. So that can fall into that category. Same thing with like fasted cardio, or like I say, anytime you're removing an entire food group or an entire macronutrient group or something like that, when it's something drastic that makes you, that if you just do this, if I just remove that, if I just stop drinking lattes every day, I'm magically losing weight. Like, what does that mean? If your latte was 500 calories, that's what it actually means. So like, could you not spell it out in your diary and see, especially if you love that latte and you're going to end up going back to it once you lose the weight. And then that's going to be your thing, is on again, off again, with like, every time I quit lattes, I lose the weight. Instead, you could, when it's time to lose weight, know that, okay, last time when I cut out my 500 calorie a day latte, I lost weight. That really sucked going without my latte. Where else can I maneuver things to reduce my calorie intake by 500 calories? So like, there are other ways to do it, but some of those ways, like I say, they're easier on the front end. The stubborn fat loss tactics can be easier, or these quick fix tactics can be easier on the front end. But when you don't have the data on the back end to back it up, you cannot recreate that scenario or fix something when you hit a new set point. And your body is always going to hit a set point. It's always going to adapt. So I just want to equip you to be able to do what it takes to break through those plateaus. So that's what I've really been focusing on this year, is really making videos and content to help you guys to not only break through your plateaus, but have a lifestyle that naturally reduces the amount of plateaus that you would have. And by creating these habits and by leaning towards the things that actually make you have to become more consistent, these are going to help you to move past the plateaus, because what they're actually helping you do is to slowly become the person who actually has those results and keeps them. If you don't ever go through these steps of understanding what it takes to get there, executing on the steps and executing on them consistently enough where they are habits for you, then basically you are this old version of you executing these temporary habits, which means you're not that person, which means you don't get to keep those results. So you're kind of like the lottery winner who like wins the lottery, strikes it big, and then they're like broker than they were when they started, like a month, 6 months, a year later, because of the fact that like they never actually learned how to handle money. They never actually learned like how to save money, how to invest, how to make smart, you know, financial decisions and things like that. And when you're living in that space, then you don't match up to being the person who has that amount of money or that amount of fat loss. So if you want to be the person that has that amount of fat loss for like ever, then you actually have to take the time to step into being that person, which means learning the ins and outs of it, then executing on those habits consistently until those habits become who you are. So hopefully that helped you guys and gave you a little bit deeper insight. I know we're going like so deep in this plateau series busting year, because I really just want you guys to crush this year. I want you to get past these plateaus. I want you to actually reach your goals and unsubscribe from this channel, because you're like, Kiki girl, like I love hanging out with you, but I don't need to talk about this anymore because it's a thing of the past, because it's just who I am. It's what I do, and I'm crushing life. So like, that is what I want for you. And that is one of the biggest things that a lot of people don't realize, is that so many people that I worked for in the past, so many people that were like, huge like success stories and advocates for EM2WL, like when we first started 2011, 10, 12. I don't even remember, but that was always one of the biggest things. People were like, where are those people? Did they regain the weight? Did they like disappear? Does the eat more to weigh less not work anymore? They're living their lives, because that is the whole point behind all of this. The entire point of all of this is for you to go on with life and not freaking think about fat loss anymore. Not sit here on YouTube or the podcast or wherever this is being posted and take in information. It's about helping you become the information, because as much as I love researching and knowledge and gathering information, I am an information hoarder. One of the things that's changed my life the most is becoming an information embodier. Like embodying the information, actually like being the action of that information and taking it and doing the things with it. And that's what I really want to empower you guys to do in this year. That's the reason why I am harping on the things about like mindset and all that stuff, because without that piece of the puzzle, none of this other stuff is going to work. So you guys know those are the 3 pillars of the Diet Rebel method, which I teach, and that is rewire, reset, and rebuild. And so many people only focus on the reset or only focus on the rebuild, and not enough people are focusing on that rewire. When you change the way that you think about fat loss, you can actually change the results that you are getting from your fat loss efforts. So that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you if you stuck with me all the way to the end. If you had any questions about this, be sure to leave them below here, or give this a like if the information was useful to you, or if you guys have any questions that you would like to have featured in a future video, go ahead and leave them in the comments below, or just email them to me at info@em2wl.com. So thank you guys for rocking with me for this entire time, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.